Africa is a continent of contradictions. On the one hand, we have access to great resources and a multitude of young minds able to use them. On the other, our dynamic in governance does not lend itself to small to medium enterprises or their support. Allow me to read from a report by the IMF concerning their outlook on Africa. Factors such as commodity price fluctuations and tightening global financial conditions and the large fiscal and current account deficits that prevail in some countries could leave us vulnerable to a potential reduction in external financing. Furthermore, global recovery and domestic security-related challenges are also risks to the outlook. Against this backdrop and beyond the immediate effects of the current shock, further progress towards diversification and structural transformation remain key to sustain high and inclusive growth, generate jobs for the rapidly growing young population, and foster integration into global value chains. This underscores the urgent need for growth of small businesses in Africa to help provide shock absorbers to these risks. As most African countries grapple with high unemployment, national and Pan-African organizations go lean in search of greater efficiencies. It's clear that formal employment is not the solution for young Africans. We need to create an ecosystem that supports existing and aspiring entrepreneurs. There is no doubt that on our continent, we have many great innovations. And while we believe in homegrown solutions to our own challenges, our businesses are still lagging behind in their ability to realize their own potential. This lag is a congruence of many factors, some to do with the access to financing, the inability to scale up, policies that are no longer fit for their purpose, and unsustainable business models. But it is not all gloom and doom, as many young business people are venturing out and taking the road less traveled. However, we do not have to reinvent the wheel on this journey. As we learn from those who have gone before us to grow sustainable and socially responsible businesses along the way, it is our imperative duty to implement and share these lessons so that we build a greater Africa, an Africa that goes beyond us, a continent that supports our aspirations, and a continent that transcends boundaries. As Nelson Mandela said, I dream of the realization of the unity of Africa, whereby its leaders combine in their efforts to solve the problems of this continent. I dream of our vast deserts, of our forests, and our great wilderness. Welcome.
That, ladies and gentlemen, was Tinodiwa Zambe Makoni from Zimbabwe. We are the Mandela Washington Fellowship for Young African Leaders, hosted by Clark Atlanta University. And this is an initiative by President Barack Obama to invest in Africa's future through investing in us, the youth. And as we are in the season of celebrating Mandela Day and celebrating the legacy of Nelson Mandela, we would like to continue with the legacy that he left of investing in Africa and building strong African institutions through investing in leadership. My name is Napoleon Young.
And I'm Lebang Ferguson. Welcome to this dynamic panel discussion today, where we have dynamic speakers from local enterprise speaking about what U.S. success and failures can lean onto African development in small business enterprise. And on the panel, we have Mr. Charlie Covert, who is the Vice President of UPS Customer Solutions. We also have Ms. Leona Davenport, President and CEO of the Atlanta Business League. We have Mr. Rodney Sampson, founder and CEO and entrepreneur of Opportunity Ecosystem.
We also have on the panel Ms. June Holder. She is the UPS Sustainability Communications Manager. And also on the panel today, we've got Dr. Charles Richardson. He's the Associate Professor of Marketing in the Business School at Clark Atlanta University. Please welcome our panel. Now, if you're watching this and following this conversation online via live streaming, remember, if you'd like to ask a question, you can do that. And the hashtag is @YaliCAU. @YaliCAU. Your tweet will come up on the tweet deck here, and we'll also be able to ask your questions live on the forum today.
Our discussion is going to have 4 primary segments. We're going to be talking about startups, about growth, about sustainability, and about corporate social responsibility. But being that we're from the Mandela Washington Fellowship for Young African Leaders, we thought we'd take an opportunity to briefly zone in on what a leadership is in the 21st century, especially servant leadership, which has become a new and opportunistic way of doing business and building business models. So we just like to ask our panel what their thoughts are about servant leadership.
And we'll start with...
We will start with Ms. June Holder from UPS.
So, to me, true leadership is based on having the spirit to move forward in a way that moves the people around you. So having a clear vision of where you're needing to head and a sense of community in everything that you do in the small scale and in the large scale, so that you can bring people up and forward with you and so that they're able to realize their true selves in fulfilling the mission that you set forth. To me, that's true leadership, where there's a path for them to follow and it's a personal path.
Awesome.
Clear vision and clear path for people to follow. We'll move on to our next panelist, Ms. Leon Davenport.
Yes, for me, servant leadership is being able to utilize who you are, first of all, in order to move a group or an idea or a concept forward, and not being so concerned about being the face of the effort or the action that you're trying to get to. If you move forward as a leader and utilize those individuals who have the wherewithal, the specialization, and the mindset and the ideologies that you're looking for, then true leadership says we can get there together. And at the end of the day, you've created the outcome that you're looking for.
Teamwork, in other words.
Absolutely, yes.
Yes. Now, this is great. Still talking about leadership and servant leadership. We'll move on to Mr. Rodney Simpson.
You're only qualified to lead to the degree that you're willing to serve. The second thing is just definitive. Leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less.
Awesome. That's a very wonderful and profound statement.
Wow.
Next, we'll be going on to Dr. Charles Richardson, who is with Clark Atlanta University in the business faculty.
Thank you. I would add the phrase principle-centered to my leadership definition. I think that people need to understand what you stand for, and those principles need to be non-varying. And if you're going to have anyone following you, they need to be depending on you as a rock. And I think particularly in today's society, one of the things that is missing in our leaders is the principle-centered part of that. Servant leadership cannot happen without principles.
Awesome. And last, we have Mr. Charlie Covert from UPS.
Yes, I think to build on the other comments, I would say authentic leadership. So you have to really care about your constituents. So whether that's your customers, your employees, the people you interact with, you have to truly, authentically care. If you try to fake that, people will see right through that. And so all of the aspects of leadership that were discussed really cannot be effective if you're not authentic.
Awesome.
All right. Let's start the conversation now, talking about how businesses in Africa can learn from the successes and the failures of American businesses. Now, like we said, our conversation is going to be split into different segments. We'll start off with incubators and startups. And remember, you can also post your questions on Twitter. Just use the hashtag YaliCAU. Okay, the first question is, according to IT News Africa, the top 3 challenges that face or that are faced by startups in Africa are access to financing, competition, and sustainable business models. Now, in your experience with startups, how can these challenges be overcome? I'll start with Mr. Simpson on this one.
Absolutely. Just to give some context, I've built 4 high-tech startups in technology. 2 failed incredibly miserably, and 2 were actually acquired. And the 2 still are sustaining businesses today. Let's start with the capital construct, because all startups, early stage, or even growth stage companies want to get to the capital. Our philosophy at Opportunity Hub, which is actually an incubator here, we have 2 campuses in town. We're working with over 100 companies, but really 20 or so are in our incubator program. And they all have embraced the philosophy that you cannot withdraw from an ecosystem until you invest in the ecosystem. Most startups coming to the table is about what they can take, rather what we were talking about, what you can give. America has some unique policies. The president signed in 2012 the Jobs Act, which is the Jumpstart Our Business Startups Act. Essentially, it's crowdfunding, sort of like the Kickstarter and the Indiegogo and the Rocket Hub, but equity-based crowdfunding, because most investors are looking to get a return on their capital or own a piece of the business, which then would lead to a return on the money invested. What I would encourage the continent to do, whether it's kind of a pan-African effort or nation by nation, is to look at policies that allow the crowd of people to actually invest in startups. And of course, that comes with a lot of advocacy and education. But if you're from a continent or a place that there's not a lot of startup capital, then each person has to do their small part to get people through. And so crowdfunding is something that I would encourage everyone to look at and embrace, and hopefully adopt some of those policies which would allow the crowd of people to actually invest in the startup ecosystem. And then what happens is some of your mature businesses that usually come in, or mature investors that may come in at later stages, once you have customers, once you have traction, they usually don't come in at those very early stages. So if you don't have a lot of accredited or what we call sophisticated investors, then you have to be resourceful in finding that capital somewhere else. Additionally, so let's work backwards. Now that you have the capital, let's start at the ideation stage and how you get to the capital. You have to learn how the entrepreneurial ecosystem functions. There's no excuse being a startup. You can have a great idea, great team, but if you don't understand how to effectively navigate the ecosystem, or this what we call this entrepreneurial supply chain, then you won't effectively grow. So going through the design theory process, we call it the ideation process, where you develop what's called your minimum viable product, doing your customer discovery, going out and doing research. Is this actually a product that someone will not just like, but they'll buy and they'll pay enough for? And then going through the business model canvassing, the generation stage, working on your executive summary, your pitch deck, understanding when to talk to the right investors at the right time, depending on what the market fit is and the investment thesis. So there are all of these things. We call it a pre-accelerator stage. Companies have to take a step back. They will never scale to the level of a UPS if you skip these stages. You have to go through these different. It's like playing a game like Minecraft, right? You don't get to level 10. You can't bypass the 10. You got to start at 1, go to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
But the question that many would ask, because nowadays we've got these superstar organizations, the Facebooks and the Googles, and a lot of people say, mine just started in a basement, they started in this building, they started in this carport garage or whatever, and it all of a sudden became big. Did they go through all these things that you mentioned, ideation, and then go into the pre-accelerator and all these things?
Absolutely. I mean, let's take Mark Zuckerberg, for example. Right? So Mark was a student. The greatest businesses solve the greatest pain points. So Facebook was essentially a way for Mark to hack into these prestigious clubs that he couldn't join. He was a nerd, he was a geek, he wasn't one of the cool guys, he didn't get the girls. So because he had a skill set, number one, he could code, he could program. So he didn't have to pay someone to actually do that for him. He developed a platform that addressed his primary pain point. He wanted to be cooler and to have friends. So being at Harvard, one, where there are a lot of resources there, he might not have gone through a formal accelerator or actual incubator, but when you reverse engineer it, look at the mentorship that he got from Sean Parker, who started Napster. Now, Napster failed terribly, not because it was not an amazing platform, it was disruptive to the music industry, but because the record labels weren't ready to give up some of that revenue. But Sean's journey allowed him to meet the right investors, meet the right mentors. So Sean became his mentor, and they were able to essentially tweak their, what we call a minimum viable product. So when you get thousands of students and tens of thousands of people using something, it actually proves out the product market fit. And it says that you actually have a potential customer base. You may not know how to monetize the customer base yet, but here again, you could get a crowd of people using that. Used Mark Zuckerberg to Peter Thiel, who was the founder of PayPal, and he made that first pre-seed investment of $500,000. The rest was history. But before Peter Thiel would even talk to him, he had an advocate in the form of an authentic leader or mentor by the name of Sean Parker. But Sean would not have even dealt with Mark Zuckerberg if he did not come to the table with a product that he had been testing and getting users. So yes, he did go through the process. So even if you can't get access to a formal accelerator or an incubator, the responsibility is on you, the entrepreneur. With Meerkat, with Twitter, with all of these different platforms, there's no excuse for you not getting access to all of the startup information and education that's available, whether it's coming from the West, the East, etc.
I think that's a very well-rounded answer. And it really, I think it leads to the next question, which was really supposed to be directed at you, Mr. Sampson, but because you've covered quite a lot in terms of the different funding aspects that entrepreneurs can actually approach in order to gain revenue and in order to keep their businesses sustainable. I'm going to address this question with Ms. Leona Davenport, and I think it's very necessary to understand the reality of what small businesses are going through in an incubator kind of program, because you're running the Atlanta Business League. It deals with very diverse businesses in all industries. So industries are very different depending on the scale, depending on the type of consumer market that you're aiming at. Sometimes it's a service-based industry. It has very little to do with broad spectrum consumers. How do small businesses and incubators deal with managing their initial capital and their standards? How do they uplift their systems, and what kind of systems do they actually implement in order for their companies to become sustainable on a long-term basis regarding all the changes and challenges on a social front or on a social technological front that Mr. Sampson has just covered?
Well, Rodney has done an excellent job in explaining a great deal of that. But what we see from the Atlanta Business League's vantage point, as you've mentioned, our business owners are so diverse. They're home-based businesses, all the way up to large companies such as H.J. Russell Construction Company that employs well over 600, almost 1,000 individuals in metropolitan Atlanta. But what we encourage our members to do, first of all, we bring to the table for them. We set the table. We provide seminars and training. We help to build relationships. We put people of like minds in the room together, first of all, and then we put them together with corporations so that the corporations can talk about the opportunities that are there within their firm. They talk about the kinds of businesses that they're looking to do business with, and they talk about capacity building. We've worked very strongly or closely with organizations who have literally had capacity building programs so that they can train the businesses on how to do business with them.
Okay.
And that's invaluable. So that's one of the ways that we do that. Others are very industrious. We're working very closely with veterans now. We're starting to work with veterans in building their businesses. Yes. And what they are looking at, there are a number of initiatives that are local and national, not well thought out yet, yes, but they're getting there, where veterans are being trained on how to build businesses, how to get jobs, but also how to build businesses. We're focused more on the business side. So there are programs that are in place to, again, help them learn the basics, the Tuck program, the Tuck, Amos Tuck School of Business, and the various national programs. We have companies who are sponsoring them, again, to go into training. You can't teach or implement what you don't know. Yes. So our goal is to consistently and constantly, again, set the table. Tell them that there is an opportunity hub that's in place for young and startup entrepreneurs, as well as established entrepreneurs. Go there, meet with like minds, take advantage of the training and the access that they're providing. Go then to Clark Atlanta University, where there are classes and there are opportunities for networking and training and building the business. And then take advantage of all of the training that is in place. I have a member right now who's about 13 years old. Yeah. Started out utilizing her experience as a security professional. started a business with someone, it didn't work.
Okay.
When it didn't work, started her own business. And now that she started that business in less than 10 years, they grew the business to $10 million through partnerships, relationships, diversification. And so this answer really could be so long that it's about training, it's about investing mentally in what you need to do. And until you know that and know how to do that, no one's going to lend you any money to build your business. And you're not going to get any investors.
I compliment.
Okay, so please go ahead.
Liana said. So when you look at the types of training that's available, but also how you finish depends on how you begin. So the systems that you put in place very early on the transactional side of the business, you know, I'm always looking for, are you incorporated? But more than that, can I see your operating agreement? Your operating agreement is sort of like the guide. It tells me, the potential investor or employee or vendor, how you're actually going to run this business. Particularly if you have co-founders, are you authorized to make investments? Your operating agreement has to give you permission to do these things. And when you show people that you follow your own guidelines, they trust you. And then you put very simple accounting practices in place. You don't need a CFO in the beginning. You don't need a controller. But, you know, you can have a virtual CFO in the name of Zero or Intuit. They have amazing tools, and we work with both of those companies to put basic systems in place. So, for instance, if you get a customer, let's say you're a supplier to UPS, they give you your first contract for $500,000. You want to have those simple accounting systems in place so that you can account for every part of the spend. Or maybe it's an investor or angel or venture capitalist. How you use the upfront money is the precedence to future investors and customers. So that legal layer, and you stack it with that accounting, and you got to stack your startup or early stage company with experienced advisors, not just consultants and theorists. But if you're in a particular industry or market segmentation, you want people from that industry that will lend their name, their credibility, and their insight and their contacts to your board of advisors. And then you compensate them. Remember, you can't pay them. You compensate them with small amounts of equity in your company.
That's a great strategy. But that strategy might bring into question one of the things that was mentioned earlier, which has to do with training. And people then look back and say, well, Mark Zuckerberg dropped out, and Bill Gates dropped out. And, you know, people use that. I don't know if they use that as an excuse or if it's valid. Do you need to be brained up yourself, or you need to get advisors who've got the brains? All you need to do is have a great
I think you're going to find it's six in one hand, half a dozen in the other. There are those who have been successful without completing college, without taking it to the next level. Again, I have a member who was 10 credits from receiving his PhD. And he decided, no, I want to focus on my business. Left the business, has a very successful technology company where he writes programs for colleges and universities and governments. It wasn't important to him. And then you have the others that Rodney has already talked about. So it really, there is no magic bullet. There's no perfect formula. So you're going to see it from both ends.
I'd like to think, I think Dr. Richardson might have a bit to say about that. Considering that
Absolutely.
he's an educator.
Yes.
I think he's had a lot of students coming out of the MBA business program in fields like marketing, communications. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, first of all, education does not necessarily mean a college degree.
Exactly.
It's only about 30% of Americans even have a bachelor's degree. But you must be educated in the field that you're going to be in. And so thinking back and all of these challenges that you face as an entrepreneur, I would start particularly with your leadership question about an issue of self-awareness and understanding that, first of all, entrepreneurship does not mean billionaire. A successful entrepreneur could be just successfully making a living and not have to depend on someone else for a job. So your self-awareness, understanding what are the skills that you have, looking at the timing. Is this the right time for this thing that you're going to start? And are you in the right circumstances for this thing? If you're in a business that is about inventing things and your government doesn't have a policy about intellectual property, then it's going to be very dangerous to put your invention out there into that space. So I think you must be educated, but we confuse education with formal book learning. And some of the best learning is experiential learning, where you do And so I think that people should be a balance of theory and practice in order to be successful.
Awesome.
Thank you very much. Before we wrap up this particular segment on entrepreneurship and startups and incubators, just to remind you, if you'd like to ask a question, it's #YaliCAU, #YaliCAU on Twitter. We'll pick up the tweets and we'll be able to throw your questions in. We're going to get into a question and answer segment right at the end when we've covered all the segments, and we'll ask the audience to ask questions in any of the segments, and we'll also have questions coming through on Twitter. But just to close out the entrepreneurship segment, there's a phenomenon with most entrepreneurs or with most startups, which is dependency on the founder. Founders can't let go. And it remains a sole trader, it remains a small company simply because the founder is everything. They're the human resource manager, they're the finance manager, they're doing everything. Now, what are some of the strategies that can be implemented for the founder to separate themselves so that the company can be sustainable? I'll just throw that.
Sure.
You want to take that? Thank you.
Having done it a few times, it's all about releasing something that you get, right? So this baby. In today's context, I think high growth companies, and just to give it cultural context, we're talking about disrupting systemic poverty and the wealth gap. We're not having a conversation of a continent that is completely thriving in all areas. There's some pain points that the world has to address and Africans have to address in all 50 plus nations. So I think if you're going to disrupt poverty and the wealth gap, you've got to look at more than just the solopreneur. You got to look at these high growth companies that will create high growth jobs. In doing that, that allows co-founders to separate themselves. And note I said co-founders. At the Opportunity Hub, we don't incubate a company or invest in a company where there's a solo founder. We believe that there should be multiple co-founders. Somebody's got to build it and someone's got to sell it, nothing else. And then once you grow, founders are then bought out by really reselling some of their equity back to the company. That's one strategy. And I'm just giving you real practical stuff that I've been involved in. The second thing is your role as CEO is different from your role as co-founder. So one of my tech companies, I was the co-founder and CEO. It was actually three of us. Well, I actually got fired from my CEO role, but I still owned 1/3 of the company. So I was able to leave, do other things, and then when the company was sold, because I had equity. And I think it's just understanding the balance between equity and ownership and also having that job. It's great you're a co-founder, you had the idea, you were there in the beginning, but what's your role today? And if you're not moving the company forward, do you have the leadership ability to actually step aside at the right time?
I think that we about growth. You just talked about a little bit about implementing strategies from a small company to grow into a larger corporation. And I think this question, we're going to ask Mr. Covert about it. Mr. Covert, we're going to ask what strategies you think should be implemented in going from small to big, considering the growth dynamic of UPS, the internal structure and the external structure. How do you look at growing a company from a small company that started off with 3 gentlemen in the early 1900s to what it is now, and the strategies that they had to implement, especially internally in building a good value proposition for their internal segment? How do you think we can do the same from starting a small company to grow into a multinational or a global conglomerate?
Well, I think it's a combination of having a strong mission and understanding what your mission is. And so that everybody who's involved in the organization as you grow understands what that mission is. But at the same time, being flexible in that mission. So, for example, if you look at UPS, it started with a 19-year-old and a couple of his partners delivering messages. Well, then the telephone was invented. So then they had to change their business model. And so throughout our history at UPS, we've constantly reinvented our business model as things change around us. And I think the environment today for entrepreneurs is extremely exciting because of all the disruptive technology that's available. So understanding what is your mission, how are you going to differentiate your company by using some of this disruptive technology that allows small companies to grow very rapidly. So for example, you used to have to be a pretty large company to be able to export goods successfully. Well, now with all the technology tools that are available, we can help very, very small companies export to dozens of countries all over the world. And so understanding how you're going to differentiate yourself in a disruptive environment and having that flexibility, but the flexibility within the context of what is your mission and having a clearly defined mission statement. I think that's really kind of a bedrock for a growth strategy.
Okay.
Now, still on that, most companies, and I'll ask this specifically of UPS, most companies that are that big and have been around for that long seem to start to have this giant mentality or giant phenomenon where a giant takes 10 years to turn. When there's change, when there's new innovations, the giant will just be left behind.
Yes.
Because they're so big, there's bureaucracy, they can't make decisions fast enough. How has UPS dealt with that? Sorry, while we're still on growth.
Yeah, and again, I think it comes back to being flexible to change as things evolve. So we have a term we use at UPS called constructively dissatisfied. So we're never satisfied with exactly where we are. We're always willing to change and willing to evolve our business as things change. If you look at the S&P 500 from 50 years ago, half of the companies in the S&P 500 50 years ago no longer exist. Or conversely, if you look at today's S&P 500, over half of them did not exist 20 years ago. And so companies absolutely will cease to exist if they don't continue to evolve. And so it's very critical that that be woven into the culture of a company. So as right from a startup position, having that constantly striving to understand how you're serving your marketplace and being flexible in a very dynamic environment. And again, I think the business environment today is more disruptive due to technology that's emerging, that you have to be able to be flexible and figure out how do you drive change and how do you react to change that's occurring around you. And so if you don't have that mindset, then yes, you will go away.
And I think that kind of sums up our next question, but we could ask that a little bit more differently. I think one of the things that may apply in this area is, can you actually manage the growth? If there's smaller companies that are starting now in this kind of era, in these kind of dynamic changes, how are we able to manage growth so that it's not too fast or not too slow for either a big company or a small company? Is there a particular place that a company should actually be in order to start moving really fast, or can you manage that growth?
Yeah, I think it's both, and it depends on how you're going to market. But I think as we see companies grow, we do see companies sometimes that grow without having the proper infrastructure with the growth. Because when you're in a growth mode, you want to take advantage of those revenue opportunities. That's your number one priority. Take advantage of the revenue priority growth opportunities while you have them. But if you do that in such a way that you're not growing the infrastructure to support it, as Rodney mentioned, then it becomes a house of cards that crumbles. And so you have to take advantage of the growth opportunities, but simultaneously as you're growing, start to build the infrastructure to manage a larger organization as you do that.
All right. I see a lot of questions now coming in on our Twitter handle and on hashtag, which is hashtag YaliCAU. May I ask, because I'm noticing a lot of contributions, may I ask that when you write your tweet, please write where you're tweeting from? Are you in California? Are you in Uganda?
Are you in Zimbabwe or Botswana?
Are you in Botswana? Wherever you are, please just let us know what city or country you're tweeting from so that we can also acknowledge. And since you are representing, okay. Still on the issue of growth. How can a growing company hedge against the risk of operating in a volatile environment, or in an environment where you're just unsure, whether it's unsure of policy or unsure of the different laws in the country? Like maybe we can wake up tomorrow and the laws have changed. We've got situations like that sometimes in Africa. Maybe it's a war zone and everything's just unsure. I don't know if in your studies or in your experience you've worked with any such companies who are operating in environments like this and how they can overcome the challenges that come with volatility.
I think risk management is really where that comes into play. And so I think the most important thing is to understand your risk and understand which risks present opportunities and then which risks must be mitigated. So there's some risks out there that create opportunities. So you might have a business environment that is in upheaval. Say, taxi environment today, Uber is creating a lot of upheaval there. And so that's a very risky environment to get involved in, potentially, but it's also an environment that you might say, okay, how can I use this asset sharing technology maybe in a different way? And so you take advantage of an environment that has risk. In other cases, you might have political risk involved or regulatory risk in a particular country. And I think the most important thing there is to understand exactly what those risks are so that they can then be mitigated and managed.
So just understanding what the risks are, is that enough?
And a strategy for how to deal with them.
Mm-hmm. Mm. And Ms. Davenport, in your case, how do you think we can deal with issues like that concerning incubators and small businesses?
Well, it's ironic that he mentioned Uber, because one of the key elements that I think that they did in starting their business, they did a great deal of research to make sure that they were legally sound, not knowing, and maybe they did know, that they were going to be challenged by all of the other transportation systems, the taxi cab industry and all of those. But they were willing to take that chance. So now what we're seeing happen is that those industries are trying to find out or trying to determine internally how do they up their game, if you will, to be a part of this phenomenon that Uber has begun or has started and is making money hand over fist with. While Uber continues to grow its business, they are advertising and marketing more than any other transportation industry or area right now because they're growing at such a fast rate. So they're taking advantage of the now, which is a smart move. And they'll wait until the laws, if they change, affect them. But right now, you make the money while you can, and you make it effectively.
Awesome.
Make what you can.
Exactly. And they may not have to get out because everyone's trying to catch up with them.
Yeah.
And another good example of this was just old is the IBM story.
Yeah.
You know, they were completely left behind because they did not plan the growth. Yeah. And every other business that came along with office machines and copiers have just put rings around there. They're still in business, but not very strongly. They don't have nearly the market share they did initially.
Okay. I think moving on, just a reminder that we are on Twitter. If you have any questions, use the hashtag YaliCAU. The next segment will be about sustainability, and I think, Mr. Yani, you can start with the first question.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I think this is where green really comes in.
Yeah.
Sustainability. A business has been started. You know, it's been in an incubator. It's a startup. The entrepreneur is now moved to growth. They've grown their business, getting established. Now they need to sustain it. So that's where we get into this segment now. What are some of the ways which African organizations can capitalize on using natural resources to foster sustainable development?
So I think authenticity and trust are two of the most important fundamental principles for any business to start on. And businesses that fundamentally intend to do good, where the vision of the owner of the business is fundamentally intending to, in some way, have a positive impact on the world, creates, like you were talking about before, creates a wake. And people that believe in a specific company, in their mission, if the mission is overt, so when a company is founded and they say, I'm here to help the people of this company to be successful, and while we're here, and if they can extend their vision into, and while they're here, here's the good that I think our company can do in the world, I think that's a very powerful start, because then other people who may not have gotten behind the company will feel good about its existence, and you create this shift in what's possible when you create a company founded in principles of good. So I think looking at impact from every aspect, from an environmental standpoint, from a community standpoint, right at the onset, and then continuing to evaluate what's the impact of our company. And we've been talking about risk and opportunity. What's the good that we're doing? What are the things that we're doing that we need to be aware of? Constantly evaluating this, I think it's a very attractive feature. And consumers will want to align with somebody who shares their vision. So being overt, being clear-minded, and constantly bringing in the storytelling aspects of it to say, here's what we stand for, here's what we are doing in the world, and here's what we believe in, but in a very authentic way. I think that's so powerful.
I think a lot of people tend to look at sustainability as something environmental. You just mentioned community and the social aspect of sustainability. I think one of the things that we would want to know, I think as businesses or as corporations, how do we measure sustainability in terms of both environmental footprints, our community footprints, and the measures that we're actually taking towards creating a legacy out of sustainability.
And at UPS, because we have 1,000 industrial engineers in our employees, so we're very focused on measurement, and we're very true to measurement. So finding companies that know how to do measurement well, that understand what's measurable, what's meaningful when you measure it, and aligning with those companies, I think, is a great strategy. You can't know everything. You can't, but you can go to the people that do, or even the nonprofit organizations that are focused on making a difference, and figure out what are the things that have an impact, like the environment. We have a very clear way to measure and to report back to our customers on their environmental footprint, on their exact greenhouse gas emissions associated with their transportation. And we do that for our customers. So customers that come to us, we can give them that information. They don't have to understand it from the onset. They can bring us in. And there's other companies that can help them with different aspects of the manufacturing part or the other areas that we don't do as a company. And bringing that together in a collaboratory way is a fabulous idea, so that everyone can contribute their part. And then inviting suppliers in to ideate, what can we do about this? Because then you also bring in the newest stories. Well, I've heard about this company, or I've heard about this method, or here's what I'm understanding about the risks or the impacts that we didn't understand before. So I think continuing to evolve.
Dr. Richardson, what do you think about how we can implement it on a marketing level, on a communication level? Because if it has anything to do with the community, then there's a lot of emphasis on communicating and making sure that that message is very clear. How do we go about creating strategies that we can create a good conversation about?
I think it comes back to the basic question of the purpose of the firm. Traditionally, the purpose of the firm has been recognized as maximizing shareholder value. Now we have the idea of the triple bottom line, which says there is economic impact, there is a social impact, and there is a financial impact, economic. So you must really try to fit your goals into attaining all of those things. And in my opinion, if you're satisfying customers and have a good corporate social responsibility profile, you are satisfying the shareholders in the long term. You may not be satisfying them in terms of the quarterly earnings, but when we talk about a sustainable company that's going to be around for a long time, that to me satisfies shareholder value.
Awesome.
Now, while we're still on sustainability, most companies, they start and they grow, and then when we talk about sustainability, the strategies that the company used to start and grow, do they change? Do you have to change your game plan for you to be able to be sustainable, or you can just continue? Because if I was listening well, June, you said, did you start on good principles? Did you start on goodness, basically? So what if I didn't? What if I just wanted a profit? I just wanted to make money. How do you then sustain?
And I've seen companies do that midterm shift, where the companies have started just with the intention of profit, and then have realized that there's a bigger impact that they can have. And they've had to realign their brands, realign all of their positioning and their messages, and kind of reconfirm this is our role in the world. It takes a huge communications effort internally first and then externally to do that. But it absolutely is possible. And in fact, back to the principles of trust and authenticity. If you're really good at communicating, here's what we've realized, and here's what we've realized we can accomplish in addition to just generating revenue, I think that could be very well received. It has to be authentic. And if a company is started on bad principles, then they might as well just vault up and start over, because they should have done that in the first place. But if it's just a company that just didn't know or just didn't realize what's possible, absolutely it's possible to change direction, but it's really important to maintain that. So you get one chance, I think, to restart in that way.
Example of one of the Atlanta Business League's members is Peachtree Movers. They started out simply to move companies, to move residential customers from one place to another. They've grown their company so that they're one of the largest Black-owned moving companies in the city. Now, the goal was simply to make money. You know, they knew how to pack, they knew how to move, they have a warehouse where they store. But what they began to do in order to do well by doing good, I think is the statement. There was a family, two seniors who had been traumatized by some young men who broke into their home. And once they did that, they were never comfortable again. So this company, Peachtree Movers, Orlando Lynch is the owner, came to them and said, we will pack you up and we will move you to another location, a high-rise senior facility that's guarded by security at no cost. And so just that, the news media picked up on it. It was across all the social media lines. So they began to do these kinds of things. Then everyone else talking about the company. And they get more business now because they did good.
Well, we need to take a short break. When we come back, we will get into we'll just wrap up with the last segment, which is corporate social responsibility. Then we'll get into the fun part, which is the question and answer segment. Thank you so much. You're watching this panel discussion hosted by Mandela Washington Fellowship for Young African Leaders. And we've got a panel of business leaders from Atlanta. Stay tuned. We'll be back.
Yeah.
Welcome back to our panel discussion. Today we're discussing how businesses, startups, and organizations in Africa can take advantage of the successes and failures of businesses in the USA so that we can be more sustainable. And we've got a great panel with us today. We've got a great audience, and we've got a fantastic audience coming through on live streaming. We've had 200 people so far that have logged on to our live stream link. Thank you so much for tuning in. I think right now we've got about 50 active that are watching as we speak, and some are logging on and logging off. But we've had a lot of activity from Nevada, right here in the USA. We've had some activity from Washington. We've had activity from Ghana. Thank you so much for coming through. And there's about 7 African countries here. We'll be going through them maybe as we're closing. And thank you all for interacting with us. And I think we're going to go straight into
the questions.
Some question and answer.
Yes, absolutely. We're going to have a member of the audience who is from the Mandela Washington Fellows, who's going to be asking a question on social responsibility.
Thank you very much. I'd like to know from our guests, at what point should an organization, including a startup, start considering having a social responsibility plan? Thank you.
That's Lee from South Africa. Okay. I think you can go ahead and respond.
Amazing question. I'm going to read something very brief that I think will answer this question. And, it's from my book, Economics. It said, the principle is simple. Wherever dollars are created and generated in a community or population, whether it's a physical community, a virtual community, a cultural or ethnic community, or customer base, a percentage of those dollars should be reinvested into the same communities they came out of in some way. And this is the essence of what we call reciprocity. And I think even when startups don't have a lot of money because they're bootstrapping, what they do have is the ability to mentor, to be a presence and positively on social media. So even as they go through the process, because that's what we were just talking about, people want to hear, tell me about you transcending the process. And I don't just want to hear the good stuff. So your social responsibility is to also tell entrepreneurs, there's going to be some good days, there's going to be some bad days. We just want the good days to outweigh the bad days. So I think you should start at the beginning, because the moment you start and get some traction, guess what? There are hundreds of others that have just gotten the idea, and they're coming right behind you.
Awesome.
All right. Keep the questions coming.
Absolutely.
Someone else is coming to ask a question. And I'm going to ask to our studio audience and our fellow fellows, when you ask a question, please state your country, your name, and then go ahead and ask your question.
Good afternoon. I'm Cindy Ndombini from Swaziland. Okay, my question is really based on the African market, where social responsibility isn't necessarily something that's built into corporate social initiatives in companies. So, as a small business, how can one encourage bigger organizations to incorporate a social corporate investment principles and values into their own strategies? Because when you try to approach them, you find that it's not part of their line item. So it's not easy for them to then support whatever initiative that you want to do. And in fact, then it makes it difficult for us small businesses to be role players in terms of how we want to participate in giving back to our communities, as we all have an inherent duty to develop Africa, and we have to find inventive ways to do that. And it's very important for us as small businesses to find synergies with bigger organizations in order to do that. So how can we effectively do that, and what principles and values could bigger organizations look at having, and what can we as small businesses do to become more attractive to create that synergy?
Especially in terms of what you said about encouraging big organizations to be more corporate, to be more responsible socially, and how can the smaller players become more attractive to the big organizations? Because investing in smaller players is also part of being corporate, of being socially responsible. Yeah. How can we become attractive?
So I think so much of it is about aligning your mission with a company that's inclined to have the same mission. So aligned goals, I think, is a really important part of it, where if you look for a company to align with, and you look at what they're doing in the world, what their intentions are, how they treat their people, how they treat their customers, and then what's the additional good on top of revenue generation that they're doing, that gives you a much more drilled down list to look at of companies that you potentially would want to attract. And then from there, it's much easier to say, here's the things that we understand to be important to your company. Here's the things that we're doing as an organization. You become much more attractive. And then being unique is a wonderful aspect. What's the unique value that your company can bring that perhaps as a bigger company it's harder, because big companies can't move quite as fast or as agilely as little companies that are able to continuously adapt to changing market conditions. So just being a little bit clever, but also thinking in terms of fundamental principles can get you a running start.
I like that. I think the issue of value that you bring is very important in that, like she said, most of the companies are not interested in corporate social responsibility. But if you show them that you can bring them value while they're being responsible, then surely they'll buy into that.
How do you also implement these kind of strategies from an internal point of view? Because you've also got your internal customer, which has to be part and parcel of having the community aware or engage them in your strategies or in implementing any kind of social responsibility. How does that work?
So for UPS, Charlie was saying that we have a culture of volunteerism. It's absolutely true. We're fundamentally, people who come to our company are fundamentally service-oriented. So we think in terms of not just what can we do better or faster or more efficiently, but how can we contribute what we have as human beings, as individuals. So looking past this wall of more than 400,000 employees, it's more than 400,000 individuals. And these are people that want to feel good about their impact in the world. We love our hero stories. For a while, we had every single week there was a driver who rescued someone, and the stories were so prevalent that we actually started to see in social media a downturn because there were so many of them that people stopped following them. It was really interesting. So these are these little hero moments where you can feel good about something that someone else did. I think those little moments are really magical, and they really help to bring things forward. So if there's something that the people that are working with this company can feel good about, it's wonderful. It's good news for everybody.
There's always a great reward, I think, in having the... Absolutely. We have questions from the audience. There's been a lot from people watching on social media and following the hashtag YaliCAU. So we'd like to ask one or two questions, and I think I've got one popping up on my screen. Okay. This one is from the Trifina Foundation, at Trifina FCH. The question is, lots of young Africans want to know the best way to tackle business failures. How can we throw light on failures? What can we do to get up? I think people want to know what we can do to get up after you fail.
fail elegantly. And what that really means is if you fail at something, make sure that you learn from it and really be intentional about learning from that failure and then applying those learnings to your next attempt. There are hundreds of examples of entrepreneurs who have failed over and over and over again, but they take what they learned from those failures and then maybe the 7th or 8th or 9th attempt to start something up, boom, it works. So I think if somebody really has an entrepreneurial mindset, they have to embrace failure. You cannot be afraid to fail, because if you're afraid to fail, then you don't take the appropriate risks that are necessary, and you don't really act in such a way to seize opportunities. So I think you can't be afraid to fail, and you have to learn from those failures.
All right,
Next question
coming through on Twitter. This is Haruna Fatawa Ndahi at Hafandahi. It says, when is a business said to be a startup in the African context? And she's coming from University of Nevada. When do you say a business is a startup?
It's when you
Absolutely.
and that's actually a little bit more complicated than that narrative. All businesses start with ideas. Right? Ideas should be addressing a pain point. We work with startups that have raised, $50 million in venture capital and don't have much revenue yet. So just, people think that raising capital is successful. No, that is a part of success, but it's actually getting customers and actually growing. There's a lot of ambiguity between the idea stage, the startup stage, and the early stage. So just those three real quickly. The idea stage, when it's just an idea. It's really a startup when you have that, what we call minimum viable product. What is that beta or that prototype that you can get to the market and actually start getting customers, raising capital, putting your structure in place. And then finally, on the early stage companies have gotten actually some traction. They've got customers, they've raised actually more capital. What's unique in America, we have companies, I often joke and say they're perpetual startups that have just been around 20 years because they're not actually growing. And the longevity of you being incorporated doesn't actually mean you're a growth stage company. And so many times they get stuck in startup mode because they don't pivot well.
What do you use to measure though that they've now grown to? Is there a certain revenue threshold that you say once you've reached this type of revenue, now you're running the startup?
It's a function of revenue. So for instance, a startup is usually pre-revenue. By the time it transitions to early stage, you're looking at, perhaps 1 to 5 million in revenue. And then a growth stage company is once you get the definition of a growth stage company, it's actually hard to grow because you can only grow usually through your investments or through acquisitions of other companies. And it's not defined by the time that you've been in existence, but growth stage capital companies are also usually very liquid, have a lot of liquidity, and that's why they can actually go, buy companies as well.
I've got another question quickly. Our time is almost running out, but coming through from Twitter as well, and this has been asked by many people. I think it's a big concern on the African continent, and I'll just pick one of the people that asked that. It's Dipo Adesida from West Africa. I'm just judging from the regalia that he's wearing in his profile picture. And the question has to do with aid and dependency, that a lot of African countries and companies seem to depend a lot on aid. What do you think? What's your take on aid? And does it really help?
Do you want fish? Do you want to learn how to fish? Do you want the top? Do you want the bait? And then do you want a pond? I think it's a difference. And I don't think it's even just specific to Africa, but even culturally underrepresented communities here in America. And I say this often, there's no entitlement in entrepreneurship. There's no subsidy that's given, usually to entrepreneurs. But I think it's very important to understand that, a man can give you a fish, but a man can teach you to fish. But just teaching is not enough, because not only does he need to teach you, but maybe he needs to help you get your first bait, your first tackle. And don't be afraid to take your first bait and your first tackle. That's your startup capital. But then maybe he can help you with that pond.
There's a mindset that I have to say, subsidies and aid, there's nothing wrong with that. There are major corporations in this country that are built on subsidies and aid and tax rebatements. Yes. So I want to make sure that everyone knows there's nothing wrong with subsidies. There's nothing wrong with aid. There's nothing wrong with investment. So it's a mindset. So I want to make sure that, as the countries think about that and as individuals think about that, I don't want there to be any shame or any embarrassment in there being businesses that are being developed based upon support for various levels. The idea is not to become comfortable at that level and to grow from that point.
You talked about crowdfunding, which a lot of people see in that regard as well. Yeah.
All right. We've got another question from our studio audience. Yes, got a young man here.
Thank you very much. My name is Chonam from Ghana. So I'm from Ghana. It's very important I said because of the question. So you see that all the examples you give are from places outside Africa. So Google, Facebook, and so on. My question is, what's the relationship between becoming successful and the geographical location of where you are? Thank you.
Yeah.
Of course, some resources, like it's building an ecosystem. But when we look at what Ndeli Nweli in Nigeria is doing, she's a very successful entrepreneur now. She and her husband have started a $30 million venture fund. And some would argue that, wait, they're not supposed to be venture capitalists on the continent of Africa. Well, why not? And so I think you have to evolve beyond your geographical context using technology, using resources, using the internet, and to be able to connect outside of your underrepresented zone, per se. And so using these linkages, like you're in America, use these linkages to actually form those connections. There are more Black-owned incubators in Africa than in America. There are only 2 in America. One in Atlanta, we have one, and one in Chicago. You have 30 on the continent. So you have more than we do in terms of the cultural context.
Wow. That gives us a lot to think about. Yeah. We've pretty much come to the end of this wonderful program. I think the podium, you can close the show for us.
Yeah, I'd like to definitely give a shout out to everybody who's been getting in touch. I'm going to go by country because we've had a lot of interaction on our Meerkat Live stream. We've had interaction from Ghana, from Uganda, from Kenya, from Zambia, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Angola, Ethiopia.
Yeah.
Wow. Namibia as well, coming through and bringing in your contributions there. We've got Nevada in the USA, Seattle, Washington, Arizona State University.
We've got Johannesburg, South Africa.
Johannesburg, South Africa.
Yes.
Sweet. Thank you so much for participating today. We hope that whatever it is that was discussed today will impact you in your business, impact you in impacting the community, and maybe give you strategies as well in terms of just effecting change in your society.
And if you've been following us, don't forget that the conversation continues. Yes. This is not the end of the conversation. The reason why it's on social media, this particular hashtag, YaliCAU, has been hosted by Clark Atlanta University, where we are right now. We'd like to thank Clark Atlanta University and Clark Atlanta University Television. We're here hosted through the Mandela Washington Fellowship for Young African Leaders. And don't forget that this is continuous. Next year, the Yali program continues. There'll be more fellows here at Clark, and we wish you well. If you're applying next year, do so. And we hope that you make it to Clark Atlanta University. Absolutely. Atlanta is an awesome city. People have been treating us really well, and we've had an amazing experience. It's almost over and going over to our summit in DC. But we want to thank every one of you for watching, participating at whatever level you're at.
I think she was paid by Mayor Kasim Reed. Marketed Atlanta a bit
I
too
must
much
have been.
Thank you very much to our
Thank
panelists
you.
as well. Thank you for coming. Please give them a round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you for the great insight, and thank you for
awesome.
The information. Thank you for watching. Until next time, God bless you.
Thank you.